Have you ever been turned away by your own employee? Ethan Grant, owner of the Grant Goods retail chain, walked into one of his own stores wearing a baseball cap, faded jeans, and using a fake name. No one knew who he was. No one cared. When he asked for the price of an item, the young man at the service counter coldly pointed, "And it yourself." No greeting, no eye contact, no idea that the man standing in front of him was the very person who had built this business from nothing. But what Ethan discovered next concerned him even more than that indifference. It was an older employee, quietly preserving the last trace of kindness in the store, even though no one noticed him. Ethan Grant wasn't born into wealth. He grew up in a working-class family where dinner time often meant figuring out how to stretch their budget through the next week. From an early age, Ethan learned that nothing comes easy and that anything earned must be protected with both hands. That's why by his freshman year of college, he was already working 3 jobs, delivering goods in the morning, loading boxes in the afternoon, and manning a convenience store at night. After graduation, instead of chasing a fancy corporate job, Ethan started in a rented, run-down warehouse on the outskirts of town, where he opened his first store selling affordable, quality household goods. The store was called Grant Goods. The slogan, handwritten in white paint on the glass door, read, "Made for you." Simple, unpolished, Ethan never set out to build a luxury brand. He wanted to create a place where working families like his could find what they needed without worrying about the price tag. Years later, Grant Goods had grown into a nationwide chain with hundreds of locations. Sales were booming, market share was expanding, and the brand had become a symbol of practical, quality, accessible retail. But as the company grew, Ethan began to feel disconnected from the very business he had built. In executive meetings, he was shown thick reports, packed with numbers, revenue rising steadily, customer satisfaction within benchmarks, operations deemed efficient. On the surface, there was nothing to complain about, but it was this illusion of perfection that made Ethan uneasy. He remembered what it felt like to walk into that very first store, where every customer comment was written down by hand, and every item was carefully considered before being put on the shelf. Now, with a system of hundreds of stores and thousands of employees, Ethan was no longer sure who he was really serving or what was truly happening beneath all those polished charts. So one Monday morning, he woke up with a clear decision. He had to see it for himself. Without telling anyone, Ethan canceled his weekly meetings, left his suit behind and changed into jeans, a khaki jacket, and worn-out shoes. No entourage, no assistant, just a regular customer going shopping. His destination, Store 132, located in a densely populated neighborhood more than 300 miles from headquarters. It was one of the stores with solid sales and almost no complaints, which was exactly why Ethan wanted to see if things were really as good as the report said. On the drive there, Ethan thought about all the employees who had worked with him in the early days. The warehouse guy who got up at 4 a.m., the cashier who used her lunch break to help customers find what they needed. Those quiet heroes, were they still being appreciated? Did the made-for-you culture still live on? He didn't expect to witness anything shocking, but he needed to see it with his own eyes, feel it with his own hands, because Ethan believed that a business isn't built on reports, but on customer trust, employee dedication, and a leader's clarity. The undercover visit began, and Ethan had no idea that what he was about to discover would change the way he looked at business, people, and even himself. Leaving behind the air-conditioned office and tightly scheduled meetings, Ethan Grant took on a new look: faded jeans, a plain khaki jacket, and worn sneakers. He removed his luxury watch, slipped his wallet into an inner pocket, and pulled a dark baseball cap over his head. No one would guess that this man was a successful businessman running hundreds of stores nationwide. But that was exactly the point: to go unnoticed, to blend in with everyday shoppers. Store 213 sat on the western edge of a bustling residential area, not too close to the city center, but not quite remote either. Busy enough to stay profitable, but far enough to be overlooked by corporate. Ethan didn't choose this location at random. The monthly reports from this branch were consistent: Revenue on target, no major complaints, stable staffing. On paper, everything looked fine, but he didn't want to just read the reports. He wanted to feel the reality. As Ethan walked into the store, the glass doors slid open with a soft electronic chime. He immediately began observing with the eyes of a founder, though outwardly he was just another passing customer. The interior was bright and clean, shelves were neatly arranged, aisles spacious. Every section was clearly labeled, just as Ethan had designed when he first built the Grant Goods chain. A small coffee corner in the back still carried the subtle aroma of freshly ground Arabica beans. True to the brand's promise of added service, no added price, he gave a quiet nod. On the surface, everything looked just right, tidy, organized, almost perfect. Ethan picked up a set of Seabull towels, checked the fabric and price tag. A familiar feeling returned. He had once handpicked the material for the very first shipment more than a decade ago. Nearby was a set of kitchen knives, a bestseller year-round, and also one of the most frequently returned items due to blade complaints. Just as he was lost in these thoughts, his eyes landed on the customer service counter at the far right aisle. Something wasn't right. The counter was empty. 3 customers were waiting in line, each holding items to ask about or return. But behind the counter, no staff, no greeting, no temporarily away sign, just the heavy air of being kept waiting. Ethan squinted. He didn't walk over immediately. Instead, he quietly joined the line. His role as an ordinary customer was now truly beginning. 5 minutes passed, then another 3. Finally, a young man sauntered out from the back, name tag reading Derek. He didn't apologize, didn't smile. He leaned against the counter, pulled out his phone, and asked with a tired tone, "What do you need?" No one in line reacted strongly. Maybe they were used to it. An older woman stepped forward with a blender and a receipt, speaking gently about a product defect. Derek skimmed the documents and shook his head, citing a vague return policy. The next customer simply asked where to find light bulbs. Derek didn't bother looking up, just vaguely pointed toward the back of the store. Then it was Ethan's turn. He smiled politely and held up his item. "Excuse me, could you help me check the price on this?" Derek didn't move. He simply pointed toward the self-checkout machine nearby. "Scan it yourself." "No, thank you." No eye contact. Ethan gave a slight nod, set the item down, and turned away. He wasn't angry. He was observing. And what he saw, this attitude, this indifference, was not what he had built. The store might be clean on the surface, but something deeper was clearly wrong. Ethan knew better than to jump to conclusions. Maybe Derek was just an isolated case. But what if he wasn't? What if this attitude pointed to a deeper issue? He needed to keep investigating, because clearly, not everything tidy is truly healthy. Ethan stood quietly by the shelves, still holding the towel set in his hand, but his mind no longer on the fabric or the price. What he had just experienced at the customer service counter weighed on him, a feeling of disappointment and dismay, like watching a child you raised start behaving like a stranger. That young man, Derek, hadn't shown even the basic courtesy expected in customer service. No eye contact, no apology for making customers wait nearly 10 minutes, no gesture that reflected the values behind the made-for-you brand. On the contrary, everything about him radiated carelessness, detachment, and unwillingness. Ethan was a patient man. He didn't anger easily, but in that moment he felt a sting, not because of how Derek had treated him personally, but because of a more unsettling thought. How many other customers had received that same kind of treatment? He imagined a single mother shopping for household items with her child, an elderly man trying to find replacement light bulbs, a college student scraping together money for the basics, all of them coming here trusting they'd have a pleasant, welcoming experience, just as the brand's original message promised, made for you. But what did they get instead? A cold stare and a finger lazily pointing toward a scanner. Without even a glance up, Ethan slowly walked away from the counter. As he passed the group of waiting customers, some of whom had already left due to the long wait, their faces showed clear signs of frustration, and more than that, disappointment. He stopped by the kitchen goods aisle, put the towel set down, and looked back one last time toward the service desk. Derek was now hunched over, scrolling on his phone, paying no attention to what was happening around him. It was the opposite of everything the company had once trained for. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, not to hide his emotions, but to see the situation more clearly. As the founder, he knew one person can behave poorly, but if that behavior is allowed to persist for too long, the blame is no longer just on that person. The blame is on the system, on leadership, on himself. This couldn't be fixed with a memo from headquarters or a phone call to the regional manager. He needed to see more, dig deeper, talk to more people. As he headed toward the kitchenware section, he noticed a middle-aged employee neatly arranging sets of pots and pans. His posture slightly hunched, uniform crisply ironed, every gesture careful and precise. There was something about the way the man worked that caught Ethan's attention, a level of diligence rarely seen. Ethan approached and asked, "Hi there, I'm looking for a stainless steel cookware set that isn't too heavy and compatible with induction stoves. Any suggestions?" The employee looked up and smiled. "Sure, this one's durable but a bit heavy, while that one's lighter and has a sturdier handle. Let me show you both." No rush, no pressure. The man spoke gently, openly, offering thoughtful suggestions like he was helping a family member. Ethan listened quietly and felt a sense of relief. There was still light here. After a few minutes of conversation, Ethan asked, "How long have you been working here?" "Almost 10 years now," the man replied, still smiling. "Name's Todd." That name rang a bell. He'd seen it in an old HR report. But now Ethan didn't need a report. He needed people like Todd to understand what was really happening on the front lines. Ethan nodded in thanks and moved on to another section, but his thoughts lingered. The stark contrast between Todd and Derek cut straight into his awareness. Clearly, there were dedicated employees, and there were others actively hurting the brand every day. What began as a simple undercover visit had quickly opened a new door, not just into the store, but into the very culture driving its operations. Ethan knew that from this moment on, he was no longer just the founder of the company. He had to become the one who reignited the original spirit, a spirit that seemed to have faded somewhere within the very organization he had built. When Ethan stepped into the kitchenware section, he didn't expect to meet anyone remarkable. But then he spotted a middle-aged man meticulously arranging pots and pans on the shelf. No rushing, no sloppiness. Each item was placed carefully, as if it were the most important task of the day. That man's name was Todd. Ethan approached, pretending to be a customer looking for cookware. "Hi there, I'm looking for a durable, easy-to-clean cookware set that works with induction stoves. Could you help?" Todd looked up, his eyes lighting up as if he was genuinely glad someone asked. "Of course. Take a look at this one. Stainless steel, induction compatibility, very durable. This other one's a bit lighter but doesn't retain heat as well. Depends on what you need." Ethan immediately felt the difference. It wasn't just Todd's product knowledge. It was how he responded. Sincere, clear, patient. That was the attitude of someone who truly cared about helping customers, not just ticking boxes. He continued the conversation. "Have you been working here long?" Todd smiled. "Almost 10 years now. Back when this was still just a small shop. It's grown a lot since then." Ethan nodded. "Still sticking around after all this time? You must really like the job." Todd glanced around, his voice dropping a bit. "I do. I love helping people. That feeling when a customer finds exactly what they need, it's genuinely rewarding. But lately, it's been harder." Ethan tilted his head. "Why's that?" Todd sighed softly, then spoke honestly. "Not complaining, just being real. Short-staffed. Every shift is short on people. I try to work extra hours, but most of the new hires aren't really into it. Some of them don't even understand what customers need. Feels like everything's veering off course." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Did you talk to the manager about it?" Todd shrugged. "Of course, but feedback usually gets ignored. They say, 'We'll look into it,' and nothing changes. I just try to keep things running as smoothly as I can. But honestly, sometimes it gets so exhausting, I just want to give up." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Todd was exactly the kind of employee every company needs. Dedicated, experienced, responsible. But here he was, carrying the weight of an entire system's shortcomings on his back. What troubled Ethan most was that Todd wasn't bitter. He wasn't complaining. He was simply trying to do his part in a machine that had lost its balance. This wasn't a personal issue anymore. Ethan thought about all the workflow automation policies, the quarterly KPI dashboards, the polished operational efficiency reports. None of them showed the real picture, that people were being left behind. The system was designed to optimize costs, reduce man-hours, and standardize everything. But in doing so, it forced people like Todd to overextend themselves while letting the careless slip through the cracks. He recalled his own slogan, "Made for you." It wasn't just meant for customers. It had to mean something for those who were sweating through each shift in every store. Todd didn't need a motivational speech. He needed to be seen, to be heard, and to be genuinely supported. Ethan understood that now a new change had to come. After thanking Todd for his help, Ethan left the store deep in thought. He was no longer a founder standing on a pedestal of success. He had returned to where it all began, and here he found a rare spark of integrity in a system that badly needed fixing. On the drive back to headquarters, Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the notes he'd typed into his phone. Todd's words kept echoing in his mind. "We're short on people, and the new ones, most don't even care." The store. 213. From the outside, it looked fine, but inside, it was a system quietly going off track. Not because it lacked products, but because it lacked the right people. And Ethan knew if this one store was like that, there were likely many others quietly rotting the same way. As soon as he returned to the office, Ethan walked into his workspace, turned on his computer, and went straight to the internal feedback system. He started with the first name burned into his memory, Derek, the customer service counter employee. Just a few clicks and a long list of negative feedback appeared. Apathetic attitude, unhelpful to customers, using phone on shift, ignores customers. One comment even spelled it out. I asked a simple question, and the staff just pointed vaguely and said, "Find it yourself." Ethan was stunned. How was someone like Derek still employed? He checked the personnel file. No official warnings, no negative performance reviews, just average marks across the board, unremarkable, unnoticed. An underperforming employee who stays under the radar, that's a system failure. Ethan then looked up Todd's file. What he found made him both relieved and furious. Todd had been nominated for promotion to assistant manager 3 times in the past 3 years. All 3 were rejected. The reasons? Not within current quarter budget, reserving discretionary funds, and the most recent, no changes needed at this time. No changes needed? Ethan leaned back in his chair. Todd was the backbone, the steady force holding things together. And yet the very system Ethan had worked so hard to build had let someone like him be overlooked, while apathetic employees like Derek quietly slid by. The problem wasn't individual. The problem was how the organization was evaluating people. Ethan opened the system dashboard to review all store metrics. Over the past year, more than 30% of stores had seen a sharp increase in staff turnover. In those same locations, customer service complaints had also spiked. The connection was obvious. Wherever employees felt unseen or unsupported, service quality declined. He sighed. From one store, Ethan had uncovered a broken link, but behind that was an entire operating model that had drifted from the values he'd originally built it on, where dedication, professionalism, and responsibility were the foundation. This couldn't be allowed to go on. Todd couldn't be forgotten just because the system was too mechanical, and Derek couldn't continue just because no one had looked closely enough for long enough. Ethan knew the solution wasn't just about addressing individuals. It was about changing how the system recognized real human value, and that had to start immediately. That morning, Store No. 213 opened like any other day. No one knew that within the hour, the entire team would face a meeting that could change their future, and that someone they never expected would walk through the door. Ethan Grant, no longer in jeans and a simple jacket, entered the store as the founder, the executive, and now the one leading a change. He went straight to the staff break room, where everyone was prepping for the morning shift. Sales clerks, stock handlers, customer service staff, they were all there. The air was momentarily frozen. Ethan Grant, the man on the company website, the head of the entire chain, was standing right there, in the flesh. Ethan gave a slight smile. "I'm not here for inspection. I'm here to speak honestly and to listen." A beat of silence, then he continued, his voice calm but resolute. "A week ago, I stood at the service counter as an ordinary customer. I saw firsthand how some people here work, and I also witnessed something that truly moved me. Genuine dedication from some of you, even while shouldering more than your share." Ethan's gaze landed on Todd, who sat quietly in the corner. "Todd," he said, "you're one of the reasons I still believe in this company's founding mission. You've kept this place afloat without getting the support you deserve." Todd's eyes widened in surprise. Ethan nodded. "Starting today, you are officially the assistant branch manager. No more budget excuses, no more delays. You've earned it." The room broke into applause. A few of Todd's co-workers clapped him on the back with heartfelt congratulations. Todd, almost speechless, just nodded repeatedly, eyes slightly red. After a moment, Ethan turned to Derek, who was trying to maintain a neutral expression, but clearly looked anxious. "And you, Derek?" Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. "I didn't come here to fire anyone, but I am here to make one thing clear. If you want to stay, you need to change, not just your attitude toward customers, but toward your teammates too. Carelessness will no longer be ignored." Derek pressed his lips together, eyes lowered. Ethan wasn't harsh, but he didn't let him avoid accountability. "I won't judge you by your past mistakes, but by your actions from now on. You have one chance, just one." No one in the room said a word. The atmosphere wasn't tense, it was awakening. Ethan continued, "I didn't build Grant Goods just to sell products. I started this company to serve our customers, and serve the people standing right here. If a company chases profit and forgets its people, then it has already lost its way." He walked slowly around the room, making eye contact with each person. "You are not cogs in a machine. Each of you contributes to the kindness and how we serve our customers, what I call made for you. It's not just a slogan, it's a responsibility." A young employee from the warehouse team spoke up hesitantly. "So, things are really going to change, boss?" Ethan looked at him and smiled. "We're starting now, and I'm not doing this from behind a desk." The meeting ended with warm applause, not because they had heard flashy words, but because they truly felt someone was finally standing with them for the first time in a long while. Todd walked out of the room with a new name tag. Derek stayed behind to begin his shift, a quiet sign he was willing to try. The store that day carried on like usual. Customers came and went, the checkout lines were still busy. But something had shifted. A fresh current had started to flow, and Ethan knew if real change was to happen, it had to start with people, one person at a time. As he left store 213 that afternoon, Ethan knew this was just the beginning. What he had discovered on that undercover visit wasn't just a few issues in customer service. It was a wake-up call for an entire system that had strayed from its founding values. The very next week, Ethan began taking action. He called a closed-door meeting with department heads at the corporate office. No PowerPoint, no long reports, just Ethan with a voice that was clear and compelling. "We grew too fast, and in the rush for growth, we lost what made customers trust us in the first place: kindness." 3 core changes were launched immediately. 1. Upgrade the training program. No more rushed or superficial orientation sessions. Ethan had the training curriculum rebuilt from the ground up, not just focusing on technical skills, but incorporating professional attitude, customer empathy, and workplace conduct. Ethan told the HR team, "We don't need employees who only know how to scan barcodes. We need people who can say, 'How can I help you?' and mean it." 2. Increased staffing at high-pressure branches. After reviewing the data, Ethan realized many stores, especially those in densely populated suburban areas, were severely understaffed. Todd's case wasn't unique. The company immediately launched a new hiring round and began reallocating staff from lower traffic stores to where they were urgently needed. Ethan was clear. An exhausted employee, no matter how skilled, can't deliver good service. 3. Launch an anonymous feedback system. Finally, Ethan rolled out an internal platform that allowed both customers and staff to submit anonymous feedback. No censorship, no fear of retaliation. Every comment was reviewed by the customer experience management team and compiled into a report sent to headquarters weekly. Ethan personally committed to reading key feedback, and he kept that promise. And soon, the results became evident. Derek, the staffer who once drove customers away with his attitude, began to change bit by bit. It started with a simple hello. Then came the willingness to apologize when he got something wrong. He stopped relying on his phone and began standing up straight, paying attention. And it was Todd, the one he once ignored, who mentored him. They stood together at the customer service counter. When no one was around, Todd quietly said, "Where I started, I was just as lost as you. But if you're kind, you'll last in this job." Derek didn't say anything, he just nodded. But from that day on, he began actively asking Todd whenever he was unsure. And more importantly, customers started mentioning his name positively in feedback forms. As for Ethan, he was no longer a distant CEO behind a boardroom desk. He regularly visited stores, no disguise needed. His real presence had more impact than any slogan printed on a package. One day, during a chat with a group of new hires, a young staff member asked, "Boss, doesn't it get tiring visiting all these stores?" Ethan smiled and answered without hesitation, "Of course it does. But if I don't understand what's happening on the ground, then every decision I make floats above the clouds. And that's dangerous for all of us." The story of Store 2 and 13 and the reforms that followed marked a turning point for Grant Goods, not because it made headlines, but because the people working there felt something real had changed. Derek was no longer a concern, but a symbol of what's possible when someone is guided instead of discarded. Todd remained humble, rarely mentioning his new title, but everyone knew he was the one others turned to when things got tough. Ethan, he kept his promise to never lose touch with reality. Because the reason he built Grant Goods in the first place wasn't profit, it was people. Made for you was no longer a slogan. It became a living promise, thanks to people like Todd, like Ethan, and even those who once got it wrong but had the courage to start again. A week later, that devoted man, Todd, officially became assistant store manager. And the once indifferent young man, Derek, wasn't fired, but given a second chance and a real mentor. Ethan Grant didn't return to HQ right away. He spent the following weeks visiting store after store, not to supervise, but to listen, and begin again, because he understood a company isn't built on polished reports. It's built by people like Todd, and it changes because of people like Derek. When someone believes they're worth the effort. And if you're doing an ordinary job, showing up every day and giving your best without anyone noticing, believe this, kindness is an investment that never goes to waste.